Okay, so this week we are covering emotion and motivation. And so we'll be looking at what is motivation, how do we define that, what are the various factors that go into that, and we'll spend quite a while looking at various theories of motivation. We'll also cover hunger, and it will become clear why when we get to that. And then we'll move on to emotions. So we'll look at how emotions are different from moods. We'll look at different theories for how emotions occur or what determines an emotion. And then we'll also look at some research on facial expressions and emotion recognition. So first of all, what is motivation? Now, your book describes motivation as the wants or the needs that direct people toward a goal. I don't particularly like that definition because really what they're defining or what it's very similar to is motives. Okay, so motives are the wants or needs that drive our behavior. Okay, they explain why we do what we do. They are the whys of our behavior. Now, as much as they might be one factor in our level of motivation, there is much more to motivation than simply having a want or a need that you need to satisfy. I mean, just because you have a motive to do something doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it or that you're going to have the motivation to do it. So for example, you might want a degree because you know that that's going to lead to a higher paid job and that will allow you to, live more comfortably and have things that you want in life. So you go to college. But despite having a motive for getting up and going to college, there are still going to be days where you don't have the motivation to go. The motive is there, the motivation is not. The level of motivation is not enough. So what is motivation? Motivation is something, it's all of the factors, biological, emotional, social, cognitive, that activate, direct, and sustain goal-directed behavior. So basically, it's a stimulus or a force within us that's directing the way we behave and think. Now, motivated behavior is categorized in 3 ways. It's guided, so it means there's a goal. It's energized, so you go after those goals with energy, and it's persistent, meaning you stick with it even when it gets difficult. So again, this brings me back to why there is this distinction between motives and motivation. You might have a goal and you might have a motive for reaching that goal. You've got a why, but you might not have the energy or the persistence to reach it. So there's much more that's going into whether or not we're actually motivated to achieve a goal. Now, let's go over this example. So let's say you're at home and you haven't eaten for a while, so you start feeling hungry. Hunger is your motive. It's the why of what you're about to do. That feeling of hunger is telling you that you need food. And so that hunger motive will activate your behavior to stand up. It will direct it and move you towards the kitchen, and it's then going to sustain that as you make yourself a snack and consume it until you've achieved your goal of satisfying your hunger. So here when we say it's factors that activate, direct, and sustain goal-directed behaviors, here's a little silly example of what that looks like. You have your motive that's activating and then directing and sustaining your behavior towards the goal. Now, obviously, you could be hungry, but maybe you are on a diet and you have already eaten everything you're going to eat for the day, or you're hungry but you're not feeling well and there isn't anything that sounds particularly good. So that motive is still there, but there are other biological or cognitive or emotional factors that are affecting your actual motivation to get food. Now, there are 2 types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Extrinsic motivation is when a behavior is motivated by an external motive or reinforcer of some kind. So basically, the motivation is coming from the consequences that are in the environment. We are performing a behavior either in order to receive something or perhaps to avoid some kind of punishment. You can kind of think of this in the same way you do reinforcement. Either you're going to receive something that you want, or you're avoiding something that you don't want, and that's motivating the behavior. So this includes things like getting extra credit, being paid to do your job, getting prizes, being praised, any kind of external motive that's driving your behavior. Intrinsic motivation is basically personal motivation. It's when a behavior is motivated by internal personal factors. You're performing them because, or that you're performing that behavior because it brings some sense of personal satisfaction. So, for example, you might read a book because you want to gain knowledge in things that interest you, or you're going to college because you want to learn more and grow as a person. Maybe you want to learn a new skill. Basically, you're doing something because you have interest in it and it's providing that personal satisfaction. Now, whether motivation is intrinsic or extrinsic really depends on your motive. So, for example, let's say you're going out and you get all dressed up, you take a shower, you make sure you smell good, you put makeup on, put a nice outfit on. You might do that because when you feel good, when you look good, you feel good. In which case, that's intrinsic motivation. Or you could be doing it to receive compliments from other people, in which case it's an external motive, so that's extrinsic motivation. So it comes down to, why are you doing it? What is the motive for your behavior? Now, as much as external factors can be very motivating, especially short term, there are some disadvantages to using it. So what you find is that intrinsic motivation decreases when extrinsic motivation is given. This is what is known as the over-justification effect. So basically, what research is suggesting is that when we do something, when something we love to do becomes our job, or there is just some form of external motive being provided, then our intrinsic and extrinsic motivations to do that thing might change. So once we're actually receiving an extrinsic motive like getting paid, we might lose the motivation to do that just for the enjoyment. So let's say you love baking and you choose to work in a bakery on the weekends. Once you start being paid for it, now there's extrinsic motivation, you might lose the motivation to do it just because you enjoy it. So your intrinsic motivation is decreasing. You no longer get the same sense of personal satisfaction from doing it. Now, one reason it is thought that this occurs is because before we receive extrinsic motivation for a behavior, we would justify that behavior by saying, I do it because I enjoy it, right? If there's no external reason for doing it, I must do that behavior because I enjoy it. So if I bake with no external reward, I must be baking because I enjoy that. However, once we are receiving extrinsic motivation, we might justify our behavior by saying, well, it's because I get paid. So now your justification has changed, and now I bake because I get paid, not because I enjoy it. And that will change the type of motivation that you have. Now, other research actually suggests that the opposite can occur, in that certain types of reinforcement can actually increase intrinsic motivation. So that then raises the question, well, when does over-justification effect occur and why? And it depends on a couple of factors. First is the type of reinforcement. If there is some form of tangible reward, so the extrinsic motivation is something tangible like money, food, then you see the over-justification effect. You see decreased intrinsic motivation. If, however, the extrinsic motive is an intangible reward, such as praise, then you tend to see that intrinsic motivation actually increases. Now, that makes sense. When people praise us, that feels good. And when we know that we're good at something, of course, we're going to be more motivated to do that and to enjoy doing it because we know we're good at it. The other thing that it depends on is expectation. Basically, are you expecting an extrinsic reward or not? If you are not expecting an extrinsic reward, then intrinsic motivation is less likely to decrease because you're not expecting any reward. So you must be doing it because you enjoy it. If, however, you do expect an extrinsic reward at that point, then you're more likely to see your intrinsic motivation decrease, because now you're doing it because you're expecting to get something for it.